The night the ambulance couldn't reach my house was the night my neighborhood learned something about power. And I don't mean flashing lights or sirens. I mean leverage. It started with my father collapsing in our kitchen. One second he was standing at the counter, teasing my daughter about her messy homework. The next, he was gripping his chest, his coffee mug shattering against the tile. The sound of ceramic breaking still echoes in my head. Dad, he didn't answer. He hit the floor. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. I remember thinking this can't be happening here. Not in this perfectly landscaped, rule-obsessed, picture postcard neighborhood where everything is supposed to be neat and safe and controlled. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Mine wasn't. Chest pain, unconscious, not breathing right, please hurry. Sirens wailed in the distance within minutes. I ran outside, barefoot on the pavement, waving my arms like a madman. And that's when I saw her. Brenda Halvorsen, president of HOA, arms crossed, SUV parked sideways across the entrance to my driveway, blocking the ambulance. Even with lights flashing and sirens screaming, I couldn't believe it. At first, I thought she was just confused. Maybe she didn't realize what was happening. But she knew. She absolutely knew. The ambulance driver leaned out the window. Ma'am, you need to move your vehicle immediately. Brenda didn't budge. I have filed multiple complaints about this house, she said loudly, as if presenting at a board meeting. They are not in compliance. No emergency vehicles are permitted on private HOA roads without board authorization. I stared at her like she had just announced gravity was illegal. My father is dying, I screamed. She looked at me with the kind of tight smile that only exists in people who think rules are more important than humans. You should have thought about compliance before escalating tensions with this board. 9 minutes. 9 minutes of arguing, shouting, and the paramedics trying to maneuver around her vehicle. 9 minutes of my father struggling to breathe inside. 9 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Eventually, the ambulance had to reverse and park at the end of the street because Brenda refused to move until another board member verified authorization. The paramedics grabbed their equipment and ran the rest of the way. They worked on my dad in the living room. Shock paddles, oxygen, chaos. They stabilized him enough for transport, but the lead paramedic pulled me aside. We lost critical time, he said carefully. He needs trauma-level cardiac care immediately. The hospital nearby won't cut it. How far? I asked. 45 minutes by road. 45 minutes. Through HOA-controlled gates. Past Brenda. I looked at the street. At the narrow entrance. At her SUV still angled like a barricade. And something clicked. See, what Brenda and the rest of the board never bothered to learn was that I wasn't just the guy who refused to repaint his mailbox the approved shade of beige. I was a partner in a private emergency aviation company. A company with a helicopter stationed 12 miles away. I stepped outside, pulled out my phone, and made one call. Launch Unit 3. Cardiac emergency. Private landing authorization granted. Coordinates incoming. The dispatcher on my end didn't ask questions. He knew my voice. Within minutes, the distant thrum of rotor blades began to ripple through the air. At first, people stepped outside because they thought it was dramatic. Then they realized it was landing on my property. Brenda's face drained of color as the rescue helicopter descended over our backyard, flattening her perfectly trimmed hydrangeas with hurricane-force wind. The entire neighborhood watched as a trauma team rappelled down and transferred my father directly from the stretcher to the aircraft. Professional, precise, fast, no HOA approval required. As the helicopter lifted off, I locked eyes with Brenda. For the first time, she looked uncertain. My father survived. Emergency bypass surgery. 2 stents. ICU for 3 days. The cardiologist told me the same thing the paramedic had implied. Those lost minutes nearly cost him everything. I didn't sleep much in the hospital. Not because of fear. Because of anger. When Dad stabilized, I started making calls. Not to argue. Not to yell. But to document. I requested official incident reports from EMS. I obtained body cam footage from paramedics. I secured 911 transcripts. I hired a civil attorney who specialized in wrongful obstruction of emergency services. And then I attended the next HOA board meeting. Brenda was in full power mode again, sitting at the head of the folding table like a suburban monarch. She opened the meeting by attempting to fine me $2,500 for unauthorized aircraft disturbance and property damage to community landscaping. I actually laughed out loud. Then I stood up and projected the EMS body cam footage onto the community center wall. There she was, clear as day, refusing to move her SUV. stating, on camera, that emergency vehicles required board authorization. You could hear my father gasping in the background. The room went silent. One neighbor covered her mouth. Another muttered, "Oh my God." Brenda tried to interrupt. I handed out copies of the county statute. Obstruction of emergency responders is a criminal offense. I handed out the preliminary notice of civil claim. Intentional interference resulting in medical harm. And then I dropped the final piece. HOA roads. They weren't fully private. When the development was built, the original developer signed a shared access agreement with the county to allow public emergency services unrestricted entry. That agreement had been quietly ignored for years. But it was still legally binding. Brenda didn't just violate decency. She violated state law. The board members looked like they wanted to melt into the linoleum floor. The next week, the county sheriff knocked on Brenda's door. Charges were filed. Not dramatic felony stuff, but serious enough. Fines, probation, mandatory community service. But that wasn't the real consequence. The real consequence came when the homeowners held a special vote. Brenda was removed as president. Then removed from the board entirely. And then the civil case settled. Her insurance paid for my father's additional medical expenses caused by the delay. The HOA insurance premium tripled. And suddenly, everyone in the neighborhood started caring a lot more about whether the board had actual authority to block ambulances. The landscaping around my yard, replanted, at HOA expense. No beige mailbox fine ever appeared again. But here's the part no one talks about. A month later, Brenda came to my door. Not with a citation, not with a clipboard, with a casserole. She looked smaller somehow. I didn't think it would go that far, she said quietly. I studied her for a long moment. You thought rules mattered more than a life, I replied. She nodded once, tears in her eyes. People love to frame HOA stories as petty revenge. But this wasn't revenge, it was accountability. When that helicopter landed in my yard, it wasn't about showing off power. It was about refusing to let someone's obsession with control cost my father his future. Sometimes the most dramatic sound in a neighborhood isn't a siren. It's rotor blades reminding everyone that authority without humanity is just noise. And every time I look at the scar down my father's chest, I remember those 9 minutes. And the day a rescue helicopter rewrote the HOA rulebook forever.